Hello, everybody out there on YouTube. We're getting ready backstage right now, and we'll be with you in just a second. Please tell us where you're coming from in the live chat, where you're watching from. We'll get started in just a minute or two. All right, we're still back here. I just changed the background. Looks like, oh, good. We got some customers. Miguel, welcome. Glad to have you here. And Jennifer, we know Jennifer from Google Developer Group all the way up in Northern Colorado. Excited to have you here. Thank you. Miguel is here from Portugal. Heck yeah. International view. Are you having a good Denver Startup Week, Miguel? Have you watched a lot of sessions? We're excited to have you. Thank you so much. We'll get started in about 30 seconds, everybody. Jennifer says hi. Awesome. All right, it's 4 o'clock here in Colorado. I'm Mark from GDG Denver, and I'm excited for this session. If you've been part of Denver Startup Week, you've seen this kind of thing before, but we're gonna start with a video. We've got some awesome speakers I'm gonna introduce in a second, but let's go ahead and watch this video as we get this kick started. Please use the live chat feature. You might be used to the Zoom stuff. This is a little different, but if you type into the live chat, you can ask questions. You can tell us where you're viewing from. We'd love to interact with you during the next 60 minutes. Here comes that video.
Hi, Denver Startup Week. I'm Ventera, CEO of Food Maven and co-chair of Denver Startup Week, the largest free entrepreneurial event in the world. And it's only possible thanks to the support of our sponsors. We have nearly 40 sponsor companies who contribute to make DSW possible. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our title sponsors, Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Xero. Our track sponsors who have made all the great content you're hearing today possible. Battery 621 in the Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zespel. Our headline event sponsors are bringing you inspiration from around the country. Thank you to Wix, Kenzen, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now let's get to it.
Quizlet is a global learning platform that provides engaging study tools to help people practice and master whatever they're learning. Every month, over 50 million people use Quizlet to study any subject imaginable, for school, work, or as part of their personal interests.
Quizlet is super efficient, and I often, walk to class with it on my phone or even just before I go to sleep.
Combining cognitive science and machine learning, Quizlet guides students through adaptive study activities to confidently reach their learning goals. Quizlet has over 200 employees across 3 offices in San Francisco, Denver, and London.
Being at the Denver Quizlet office for the last year has been pretty incredible. Seeing the office grow while maintaining its, core connections to our values. It's been an incredible experience to be a part of, seeing how humble, candid, and open everyone has been, and being part of a mission-driven company in a time of uncertainty has been incredibly rewarding. So I look forward to, what the future brings, because the last year has been a wonderful experience. Thank you, Quizlet.
Hey everyone, my name's Adam Bauman and I'm part of the Quizlet team here in Denver. I'm proud to work for a company that's goal is to help every single person on this earth become a better lifelong learner. One of my favorite things about working at Quizlet is how much we follow our company values. There's always learning opportunities. We encourage everybody to teach themselves something new, as well as help each other learn. Whether it's from art classes or lunch and learn talks on latest technologies, there's always something new to find and help yourself grow. And I really feel like that's one of the best things that any company can offer is growth and opportunity.
All right, we're back and live. This is the AI and voice application panel. I'm your host. I'm the leader of GDG Denver. That's Google Developer Group Denver. My name is Mark, and I'm going to introduce your speakers. First, I want to introduce some of you live audience members out there. You're watching on YouTube right now, but there's a live chat feature, and you can enter some notes in there. Tell us where you're watching from, like John did, who's a Nuggets fan. Yeah, go Nuggets. Big win last night. Very exciting time to be in Colorado. We already heard earlier from Portugal and Northern Colorado. Let me introduce the panel, and that might prompt some questions from the audience. So let's start with Noble Ackerson, longtime friend of mine, coming to us from Virginia today. Pretty exciting. This is a nice thing about the remote. It's not great that we're in the middle of pandemic, but we can make lemons out of lemonade. And one of the cool things is we have a really excellent panel today with speakers from all over the country. Let's see. Let's go to our next speaker, Jeremy, coming to us from Texas today. A very Noble, a former Google developer expert. Jeremy, a current Google developer expert and podcast expert, voice app expert. He's expert in all the things. You can read all the stuff there. And our final panelist today, Jessica Dene Earley-Cha, coming from California. She works at Google. Pretty exciting. She's a developer advocate on the Assistant platform, and she's excited about voice user interfaces. And we're going to get all kinds of great info from her today. Pretty excited about that. So let's get started. Let's do this. Let's see what the audience is into right now. We got another Denver folk, and here we go, down under, all the way from Australia. So this is pretty neat. Denver Startup Week going international this year with people from all around the world. Let's see. Let's start with Noble. Do you want to kick us off with some data privacy talk, maybe, Noble? That sound good?
That sounds great. Hey,
all right,
first,
I'm gonna put you on the big screen.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. I think this is my first startup weekend at Denver, DSW. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the invite. But yeah, why data privacy for me, as at least one of my premier conversations that I always give talks about, try to instill with my developers, designers, researchers, is because essentially privacy in this day and age, 2020, data privacy, we've gone from a period of data being super expensive, like literally hard drives cost, a terabyte costing, a few $100 maybe a couple decades ago, to it being a commodity. And so it costs nothing to store information. And thus, it's easy to abuse. Just collect all the things and about me, and we'll worry about what we need later. The problem is that, with a lot of, we'll talk about voice here in a second, we talk about facial recognition, all the avenues by which we collect sensitive information, personally identifiable information. With the data being so cheap, it's good to start sort of doing a reset and start thinking about, the implications of, ingesting so much information, in the case of AI, at scale, at a rapid pace that humans could not keep up with. So I want to take a pause real quick and say, when I say data privacy, I mean three core things. Give me context for your customers or your users, or as a consumer myself, I expect some sort of understanding of what information is being collected. So when I activate my voice assistant, when I get scanned for some justifiable reason, or if I'm recorded and that data is going to be used for some specific information, some way to provide me context as to what's going on there. So that's the first thing. The next thing is choice. Now that you've provided me insights into, why you need my information, I need to have the choice to give my consent about that information. And it's crazy because I don't know whether you guys remember, maybe even on the panel in 2018, in about April or May, you started receiving all those GDPR. We really love your privacy and all that stuff, and it spanned the gamut. And so, giving me the choice to act and give consent or revoke consent if I still find value in the product. And so I promised three. I love threes. So the third one is control. Okay, fine. I want to use the voice app to track my pizza order or whatever, and you need my information, my voice print as part of that, maybe. Well, the third definition of privacy for me, or the third key tenet of my privacy definition, would be control. So how accessible, how easy, how intuitive is it for me to actually act on those my consent or revoke my consent, or those choices that I talked about. And it's something that I went on a tear in 2016, just giving talks on data privacy to pretty much anyone who would invite me. I think now we've reached a point. I'm lucky to be part of an organization called the Open AR Cloud, which brings my two loves, which is augmented reality. I know on my profile, Mark, you added Google Glass. Yeah, I'm really a big fan of heads-up displays, augmented reality, extended reality, as we call it in the open source world. And that sort of, as a former fitness buff and a technologist in that space, it sort of brings me full circle with all the information that gets collected and how we can be more cognizant of what we sweep up. That's my spiel. I'd love to open it up for Jeremy or Jessica.
Yeah, any thoughts, guys, on privacy?
It's an area that I'm also very interested in. Oh my gosh, I just activated Siri. No. So
speaking of privacy, speaking of being listened to.
Somehow, that was interesting. That's a very Black Mirror moment. The idea around privacy, the definition in one dictionary at least, is freedom from unauthorized intrusion. Unauthorized intrusion, freedom from that. What does that really mean, and how does that play out in the world? I think there's a lot of people who think privacy is really around data security, and that's simply too little of a definition. Just because my data is encrypted somewhere and not accessible by others doesn't mean that I'm not being infringed upon it in the sense of privacy. But I'm also very interested in talking through some of the concepts of the psychological aspects to privacy. When you're in different places throughout the day, whether you're at work or you're at home, the way you speak, the way you act, the things you say are different. And there's a sense of context to the way that we work within our daily lives. And what we consider privacy in one context may not be a big issue, and in other places it might be a problem. For example, I have young children, and it's still happens where I'm in the bathroom and they come in. Now, it's understandable. It's not my favorite thing, but it does happen, and as many parents experience. But if that were to happen in the workplace, that is a very different experience, or anywhere else, essentially. And so the idea of privacy being very contextual is why it's really so hard to define and to say this is privacy and this is not. So to help combat that problem, you have to be very clear about what you're doing, be very deep in your research about what people's expectations are in that context, how they're interacting with things, and be able to track that through your research ahead of time so that you can build things that are that have privacy in at the foundation. Privacy is not a feature anymore. It's something that has to be foundational to our products and services. If it's just a feature, it's either going to be toggled off by default, which may happen, or unknown to users, and that abuses potentially their rights, or at least their understanding of things. So build those things in from the beginning, but know the context very well, or you will get privacy wrong. And you may very well mess up along the way at some point, because it's so hard to get it right for everybody. And even different countries, different regions, what's acceptable in one place may not be in another. And so that makes this a very hard thing to do.
Awesome. Jessica, any thoughts on privacy?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add, but just wanted to re-emphasize that it's something that should be customizable. I should have the choice whether I want something to happen now and be able to go, no, I want to change that from now on. And I think that's a very human thing. Because this is the first time as humans we've lived somewhere that everything is getting recorded, and we don't know what this means in the long term. So I know by default it was let's record everything, but that's not the best way to do it. So I do think something that's really interesting in my line of work is I work with third-party folks who want to build onto Google Assistant, and I get that question a lot of like, why can't I have this, or why can't I have this raw access to like their voice or XYZ? And it's just like, no, for privacy reasons, we will never do that. At least that's not on the plan. So it's interesting to sit where people are asking for more information about users because they want to build and add more access or more functionality. But at the same time, it's like, oh, we don't want to just open the floodgates and then kind of retroactively be like, oh, never mind, just kidding. So it's interesting to hear, to see both sides. And I could see there's how people could use it for good, but we can't necessarily assume everyone will. And not having that option is hard. Yeah,
awesome. We got a couple questions for Noble, and I just want to show, Oh, actually, I do want to show that. If you have questions for panelists, we'll address them later. So please post them into the live chat on YouTube. But what I wanted to show was this. Hello from Brazil. Hello, Brazil. I don't know how to say that in Portuguese, but hello. Oh, no, I don't. Let's see. Here are the questions from Miguel. Here's a question for Noble, and we'll get him back on in a second. I have a digital assistant related startup. One of the things I get asked is, what can you collect? I understand that digital assistants are going to be the best one-to-one marketing tools. And then as a follow-up to one of Jessica's comments, won't companies abuse and collect more than they need? And if so, how can we control it? So since this is privacy related and Noble's our resident privacy expert, we'll let him address those if that's okay.
Yeah, I can kickstart it. Thanks, Miguel, for the question. Essentially, this is going to sound almost contradictory to what I said. If you feel you have afforded the trust of your users and you have a justified reason to collect whatever information that you need, and your users trust that you will treat them right, and you adhere to your local or your country's laws around data privacy, and those are growing. You have the freedom to collect whatever you need. There are guidelines for how long you can collect it, depending on what law or where you're coming in from. I don't know what laws are in Brazil or in Australia, or I know for sure the EU because of the GDPR. But collect anything that you need, but do right by your people, because it's actually not your data at the end of the day. It is a human's. It's that information is related to a human, and just basically put yourself in their shoes. What I want to say is two things. One, when I say trust, I mean you're being transparent about the data that you're collecting. You have, let me rephrase that. When I say trust from a user's perspective, is that they agree that, and they see the context that I mentioned before, that you're collecting this information, you're keeping it for this long. So this data transparency is apparent with what you're collecting. It's not some back office brokerage to sell information after you default toggled on the thing with that nobody read. You've projected some sense of value delivery by over time, and your customers and your users trust. There's a consequences acceptance there. They trust that if anything should go wrong, this company, Miguel's company, has the right practices. They follow the right law. They follow the law. And in the case of the EU, within 72 hours, if there's a data breach of my information, you have to let me know. You have to inform me, and you have to inform the ICO, the regulatory body in that region. It may be different from country to country. I know California, the great country of California, Jessica, has its own law as well. That was a joke, but yeah, you just have to do right by people. You have to have a justified reason to collect that information. It has to make sense, or else you won't your customers won't trust you. But you just have to understand what you're doing and do right by them. I think I've said that a few times. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
Terrific. All right, we're going to move things over to Jeremy, and we're going to pivot a little bit. We might come back to privacy later, but let's pivot into voice applications. Jeremy, you have a lot of experience building voice applications. The audience is probably thirsty for knowledge about that. Can you talk about designing voice applications and how to grow voice applications to reach large audiences?
Yeah, that's not something I can do in just with its entirety in a couple minutes, but I do want to emphasize that I am a developer turned designer in lots of ways, because the first thing I built, I was like to my wife, come here, try this out. And it didn't work because she said the wrong thing. It's her fault. No, it's not. I designed something that wasn't very intuitive. It used jargon and things like that. And I went through the process then of really building up the skill set of design. And not that every individual needs to have that full skill set, but when you're building out something for voice, you have to remember that voice is not like text or visual based experiences. It's very strong in your ear and has a very different emotional connection that you can read a text message and you can hear it spoken and have completely different experiences. In fact, when you read text messages, you kind of hear it in your head and you can replay it several different ways. And sometimes, is that sarcastic? Is that something funny? But when it's actual voice, that ambiguity is downplayed quite a bit, and it can be very hard to do well. So thinking through the experience ahead of time is so fundamental to making everything work really well, that you need folks on your team who have this skill set. And people may not need to be linguists, or there's not a specific background that necessarily makes somebody a good voice designer. But they do need to be thinking about various things, including what is the flow through the app, and what are the different contexts that's in. So it might be one thing that your app does, it might be a dozen things that you do. What are people saying? How are they moving about in this space? Usually you kind of think of it in the physical realm, because that's how we still map things out in our mind, is you go from here to here and there's this physical space. Can you map out the experience? But no, if I'm in one place, how would I get over there? What would I say? Is it natural? Is that possible? And then thinking about things like, as people get into the experience, you've got to provide a certain amount of guardrails. There's a lot of guardrail challenges and details. I recommend you Kathy Pearl's book on designing voice user interfaces, I believe. Kathy Pearl, you're welcome. But that's a fantastic book about all of the nuances and details around these little caveats on, okay, how many times do you like remind somebody what you just asked them before you give up? Or how do you phrase things? Another element then is, again, the context. If we're not talking about privacy, then we're just talking about localization from coast to coast, even in the US. The way that I might say something could be very different in California from Montana to Alabama to New York. And we have to be very mindful of things that we say, how we say it. And I live in Texas, although I'm from the Midwest. So I hear a lot of Texas-isms that I'm still like, what does that mean? You got to avoid that kind of lingo. You've got to think at a level that's generalized and works for a lot of regions, but you're still going to have to then at some point cap and say, look, I might have US English, but it's not going to be British English or Canadian English. And the same, it gets even harder, I think, when you localize other languages, which, German from Germany to Australia or Switzerland can be very distinct versus American English is maybe, you can still understand each other generally, but then there's some contextual words that might actually change the entire meaning of things. So as you change the context of where things are going, you can't just build something once and then translate and move to other places. You've got to think about scaling, localizing, being very user-focused in every place that you go. And that designer person or group in your team should be able to help direct you, building artifacts that help describe what does a design look like that engineering can understand and work with. And those things, there's a lot of documentation things out there, lots of options. There's not a best practice, I think. There's plenty of them. But having something is much better than what I did when I started, which was just coding something and hoping it works. Because usually then you get too far down the path of building that changes are so expensive that you're like, well, we'll just have to force people to learn how to say it this way. And that's essentially the antithesis of what you need to do with voice experiences. People should lead the experience, and the voice experience should reflect what people drive. And that's really hard to nail, especially if you don't start with design.
All right. Awesome, Jeremy. We got a question from the audience. Looks primed for you, so I'm going to put it on the screen and we can read it together. What are the tools mostly used for the voice-first design, starting from analysis, design, architecture, development, DevOps, publishing the app?
Sure.
Do you want to address that?
Yeah, a couple of easy things that I like to do. First off, if you can write a script, this tends to be one of the fastest, easiest things to do. Just write down, how would it, in your head, what do you think is going to happen? And have a bunch of people do this in the team. What are you thinking through? And just get that artifact out there. And that tends to be your high-level research of, okay, we've got 6 people who have written down what in a sample conversation might sound like. And you should see quite a bit of difference in just that sample set. And then let's say you refine those a little bit. I love doing things with other individuals in a role play scenario where I sit back to back with them. I pretend to be the agent, the voice experience, and they're the user. I'll give them a context, say like, you're trying to order a pizza or whatever the app does. I may give them just a few pieces of information to start from on like a card. And then we role play, try to figure out some details. Those are fun for one thing, but they're also really easy to do. They cost nothing, next to nothing, unless you're going out and actually finding users, which is great. If you can, please do. That can be hard to do, and maybe you do that sometimes. So I find those to be really helpful for that early phase in your design. As you get a little bit more firm, you want to start tracking all of the statements that you have compiled, all the things the agent might say. You want to start putting those things into an outline in a document. There's some tools like VoiceFlow, which is a really popular voice prototyping tool, which can do a really good job of outlining different options. And it's super annoying when this agent says the same thing over and over. So usually you have a couple of options when you hit a certain scenario. So it might be, hey, what would you like to order today? Or what pizza would you like tonight? You know, 2 very simple ways of asking the same question to give it some freshness. So you want to track those things, and probably I've seen anything from spreadsheets to fully custom tools to Adobe's InDesign, or what is it called? Not InDesign, Adobe's tool that has some voice. I've seen several tools in different teams find the right one that fits for their workflows. I particularly like to do it in rough code prototypes as someone who can do both sides, and then try the agents out with people. Again, getting that rapid feedback. I also draw drawings. It's weird to think that you would do that with voice, but drawing, like, what are people doing? Where are they going? What are they thinking? Pictures in your mind can really put you in that scenario to help you think through it. So there's a few ideas.
Nice. Awesome. Jessica, I'm going to toss it over to you, since you help developers design and build awesome voice apps. Can you just follow up on what Jeremy was talking about and tools that are available? And
yeah, I did a whole talk with Kathy about some tips that developers and designers could do together to make better voice applications. So definitely encourage, check out the I/O 2019 Let's Talk. And Kathy Pearl is the Kathy Pearl that Jeremy was mentioning. She's fantastic. I've seen a lot of variety when it comes to how people build. My recommendation always is don't build on your own. And it's interesting how many times I've said that, or it's written out, or it's, we tell folks, and then people get stuck and they're like, but why isn't this working? It's like, oh yeah, because not everyone thinks the way you do. And I think that's a hard concept. I think it's hard for folks to envision other people interacting with something that you've built. And so I think that's key. Something that me and my team, we definitely do is I don't even give people scripts at first. I just give them the scenarios and actually write down what they say. So I think I put people more on the spot than Jeremy. So I'm sure those folks, you could tell them that and be like, see, I'm nicer. But yeah, I go into like, no, let's just pretend this whole thing is happening and you're doing X and you want to get Y. Go for it and see how that's happening. So it's a little bit more organic. And I generally record it. Oh, thanks. I record that audio because so many times we miss some of those really great contextuals, uhs and pauses, and just to make it easier for folks to understand. When it comes to designing, I like to think of things as scenes, like in a play or a movie. Like you could think of things kind of moving along. And unlike a movie or a play, and this is generally where I pivot over to like a choose your own adventure book, which are books, just in case people are not familiar, they're books where at the end of one section will go, do you choose X or Y? And if you choose Y, you go to page 32. If you choose X, you go to this other page and the story continues. And so I like to think of a combination of those two. That way you can have multiple paths and sometimes they intertwine. And it is the developer and designer's job to make it easier for the user. I have heard many times from folks going, they have to do it this way. Like the user, we're going to train the user to do this. And that is not helpful for anybody because that's not how people work. I will never go up to somebody and be like, no, don't talk to me that way. You have to say these words for me to interact. Like that is just not a way a human would do it. So with these voice applications, why would you expect the same thing? Something that's really interesting when it comes to voice, especially now with smart displays, it's trying to think of these experiences being voice first because it's so easy for somebody to design the visual elements first and then add in voice. And that's usually like a horrible way to start things because it ends up biting you in the tush later. And so it's really like trying to think of the voice part and how people would flow within that and building out more functionality to support people if they, I hate even saying the word errors. They're not errors. If somebody, you're asking them out of these three things, what do you want to choose? And if they say banana, like, we need to go, oh, yeah, that's not one of the options. And like, let's bring them back into the conversation versus being like, no, you're doing this wrong. So there's a couple of elements there, but thank you for whoever posted the YouTube video.
We have a question. I'll leave you up, Jessica. It's kind of around developer pain and programming for multiple platforms. And maybe Jeremy will have an opinion as well. But the gist is how to build platform agnostic voice apps. Is there a good way yet Any thoughts on that?
I generally don't develop for Alexa, so I would say I'm at a disadvantage here.
Okay.
My specialty is Google Assistant.
Okay, let me toss it over to Jeremy for that question. Did you?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's similar to the challenge that occurs when you try to build a mobile app for Android and iOS at the same time. There's certain trade-offs. So it's not that I'm saying don't do it, but realize that when you choose, there are a couple abstraction frameworks out there that allow you to write something, and then it generally exports a project that then you import into all the different platforms. Jovo framework is a very strong candidate there.
How do you spell that?
Jovo, J-O-V-O.
Thanks, Miguel from Portugal.
Yeah, Jovo is great, and great people behind that. But the abstraction does mean if you're trying to use cutting edge things from a particular platform, your mileage may vary. And there's just, they have their own language of how to build something so that it then translates into something else. And so the more layers between your development and the end goal, it can cause a little bit of uncertainty about what the result will actually be like. Because there's some differences in the way that just even when I talk to Google or I talk to Alexa, Google's a conversation between me and Google. Sorry, I triggered somebody's device right there, didn't I? I just quickly muted mine. This is like, well, I'm gonna make sure. When you're talking to Alexa, no matter if you're talking to Alexa's core services or third-party things, you kind of feel like you're always talking to the same agent. Based on their model, Google hands you off to a third party. And I think that affects the way you want to develop your skills or actions or capsules or whatever voice experience. Keeping that in mind, it's not just the technical issues, but then the design issues of sometimes you don't want the same design across the two platforms or multiple platforms. And keeping that in mind is important. Again, that's where the design comes in early.
All right, awesome. We got a smile out of the audience on that one.
Apologies for that.
That's fine, Noble. We got a bunch of comments about data privacy, and I want to transition back to that real quick for Noble. So let's just churn through all of these, and then we'll. Sure thing. I want to make sure everybody gets to participate. Let's see. This is about privacy. Won't companies abuse stuff? Long-term, Google is going to make billions training. Let's see. This is interesting. How will the internet look if we don't allow privacy invasive stuff? Many things free will now cost us, or what might happen? Here's a counter argument that as long as the data is de-identified, what's the big deal? Let's see. This is not privacy specific, but maybe any of the panelists might talk about anything they've seen in the library industry in voice or AI or privacy related. Sorry, that's not the one I meant to show. Where do you draw the line? This is directed at Noble. The law usually lags behind in these matters. Should the industry be more proactive? And then I think there's one. No, okay. So that's a whole bazooka full of questions and comments from the audience. If you want to address any of those, Noble, that'd be terrific.
Do we want to start with the last one first? I think I saw that one, and I appreciate the comment. So the comment was, I'm sorry?
Is this the one you're talking about?
Yeah, observing the law. I guess there's the law and then the regulations. And so the law is the law. If you live in an area where you're developing an AI-based solution or a voice app, what have you, and the law states that you shouldn't, collect biometric data and store it in your systems or have it cross borders to another part of the world, and you violate that, they're pretty hefty fees that you have to pay for. So. Yeah, I get the where you're going as well with that, but then there's also I have a controversial view on on ethics and putting it all on companies, right? To do right by the people they serve. And yes, the market will, the company will win or lose based on how they treat people. Or on the other side of things, just being this totalitarian thing where no one's talking about that. I'm not, and yes, the laws do lag behind. The fact of the matter is that today, 2020, a decade ago, even before, there's a growth in data. Massive amounts of personal information is given up for convenience. I found it, I think there was like a zero-sum mentality where, oh, it's just a free service. Check this box that you're not going to read, give, your kidney and everything that you own. You don't read it, so who cares? And then for free, I give away all my information. I think there's, with all the breaches and all the privacy issues, there's been this sort of flip where it's more positive sum, where it's growth in data, growth in awareness, because every other day there's another breach with my information out there, and I could be at harm because if I'm marginalized or if I'm trying to be protected, I can't be if I'm in a certain country, or somebody can hack my bank account with my open information. This is something that is on you, the company, but you need some sort of governance, and so as a result, there's been a growth in regulations to respond, and that's the job of lawmakers. So I'm not really on one side or the other. I think one sort of helps force another to do more. One may lag or one may not care, and the other will just sort of nudge. It's sort of a give and go. We shouldn't have to sacrifice our privacy at the expense of whatever services, no matter how magic it is.
Okay, terrific. I have a new topic for Jessica. Do you want to talk about smart displays some? That was something we had. Yeah, great. Go for it.
Yeah, of course. So just in case people are not familiar with, there are smart displays that have come out a few years ago, and they're becoming more popular, especially since the pandemic has been happening. People are at home, so the usage of smart displays have gone up, which is interesting, especially when it comes to the voice space, because voice was historically just your voice. There wasn't any visual elements to it.
Yeah,
so it's
Jessica,
that
can you
interesting.
clarify? Sorry, a little jargon clarification. So a smart display, by that you mean basically like a Google Home or an Alexa that has a screen.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So you're talking to Google or to Amazon through this device that could reply to you using the voice and having visual elements on there, which voice is already hard to design. But when it comes to the way folks are interacting with it, it's interesting to see how younger folks, especially children, it's more normalized for them to just start pushing buttons or just talking to devices. I think one of the stories I treasure a lot is one of my friends, her daughter was trying to talk to an old, it was an old CD, player. And so she was trying to talk to it. But she was like 3 years old, so she had no idea. But she was just like, "Hey Google, hey Google, Alexa," and it was just adorable. But it's really interesting to see how that is the norm, and seeing that now we're having not just these audio, but we're having visuals. And something that Nova was mentioning earlier when it came to glass and VR, there's a lot of things that are starting to change the landscape of how folks are interacting with their technologies, and it's becoming more and more just normal. And I think there's a lot of discussion that is needed on how do we design these experiences for folks to let them know what it means to interact with a voice device and be able to play with that, and what does that mean on what type of data and what type of experiences we should be creating as well.
Awesome. So because this is a developer track, and presumably a lot of the people tuning in right now are developers, can you talk, and developers care about eyeballs or ears or mouths, whatever body part. We're talking about humans we want to connect with. we want to be on platforms that are growing. Are there any trends around growth in voice or smart display experiences that you could share with us?
Yeah, definitely. I know that our latest numbers were at the Google I/O 19. I know that was our biggest push, and we're actually going to have a Google Developer Day event in October. So I know new numbers are coming out. But what I can share is there has been an increase. There's also been an increase with, again, smart displays being sold and being used, which is really interesting how it's more comfortable for folks to do something that they can have that visual element to it. And I think that has to do with how we operate with our digital lives already. I know when people were talking or really pushing to do purchasing via voice, I know even myself, I was like, oh, I don't want to just buy a shirt using my voice or a car, like rent a car. Like those things just didn't feel natural or normal. Like I wanted to see it to verify and go, okay, now we do it, which has been the model that we've taken at Google to pivot any of the actual transactions over to a physical device, and you
like
do
a
it
phone, for
like
example.
a phone. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So like you talk to the device and it says, okay, confirm on your phone.
Exactly.
Okay, that's the workflow. Cool. So it's growing. I remember the numbers from 2019 and the graphs. They were hockey sticks. They're what every entrepreneur wants to see.
Oh, definitely.
So I look forward to that. When is the October event? Can you?
That is October 8th.
Okay, and people can. Is it free
it's free
online?
Yeah, it's free. You could definitely register online. It's Google Assistant Developer Day.
Okay, Google's Assistant Developer Day. I'll try and enter a link into the chat in a minute. Okay, awesome. Whoops. Now I got my voice device talking to me. Let's see. Okay, we got a question for Jeremy and Jessica. Jessica, I'll leave you up for now. Conversations are not a straight line or a straight path. So how can we design great voice experiences using conversational flows or scripts, knowing people might not follow it?
Oh my gosh. Yes. And this is where you might have your main path, your happy path. That's generally what it's called. This is the path that people are going to take to experience this voice experience. And after you kind of figure out what your happy path are, you're going to want to identify what are some common alternate paths and how can you route them back to the main, ideally. And that usually means you have to have very good explicit context up front, because I've seen some voice applications that will just go, hi, what do you want to know? And that's so vague that people don't know what to do. They're like, well, tell me, how tall is Obama or something strange. And that might not be what your voice application is going to handle or is designed to handle. And so a lot of it is setting folks up for success up front, but then also being able to handle how can these things get branched off. And you won't capture everything. So I love for folks, after they get something out, they go into alpha or beta testing, get some data and some numbers and see where people kind of falling off and what are those trends, and make your voice application better using that data. And that way, when you publish it for a wider audience, then you could, again, do more iterations, see where people are falling off or having trouble or getting stuck. So that way you could encapsulate that better. But I doubt, or I've never seen a voice application being so well designed out in the front. And like, that's not something that I think we have figured out yet. So it's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, awesome. Jeremy, do you want to add anything about unhappy path voice development?
Unhappy path. Well, Jessica's comment around scenes is really useful. You're going to have a sense of a flow, like you want to push people through a certain series of things. It's not always true that there's a certain order to those steps. I think of them as like floating items that you can move around, and potentially you can hop from rock to rock, but eventually you're hopefully going to get to the other side of the stream. So if you go to the idea of ordering a pizza, when you get there, the first time you visit, you may want to give some additional context. Welcome to my pizza shop. We have 3 types of pizza. You give an introduction, you give some context, you give not a say this and you will move forward, but rather give them something naturally intuitive, like what would I hear if I walked into a pizza shop? And so you start listening. If someone says, oh, I'm looking for like 3 pizzas. Okay. Then you think about, okay, what can we do with that information? And at that point, you might loop them through a flow 3 times to do the details of 3 pizzas. And at any point, you might also give some additional context. Things like they're saying, well, what toppings do you have? That might be something somebody asks. Or you might even say, what toppings would you like? As the agent, you might say, what toppings do you want on this pizza? We have pepperoni. You might list a few as a way to prime their ideas. What are the most common popular things? But give them a chance to ask for additional options, because you maybe have 20 options. Don't list 20. That's too much. That's 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes of pizza toppings, and they're going to say, I don't remember. This problem when you order from a restaurant, and they're like, my daily specials are this, and you're like, what was the second one? Same thing happens. So, and when people get off the rails, they start, you go back to the idea of banana topping. You're like, we don't have a banana, but can you detect, there's different types of failure points to think about. There's silence. They're not answering. That could be they walked into a different room. It could be an accidental trigger. It could be that their kid started screaming in the other room and they had to go attend to that. Any number of reasons that they're just no longer there. But you want to give a chance to see it. You ask them again, and if you continue to have silence, you fail out gracefully. And maybe, hopefully, if they come back, you can re-instantiate that session where they were. We've got 3 pizzas ordered, but only 2 have toppings. You want to finish the 3rd. Another type is we just simply don't understand what was said. It's unintelligible. The words themselves are just, somebody's really loud in the background and you can't hear the words over the top. So your transcriptions are gibberish. And then there's words that you understand the words, like maybe a banana, but it's not a real option. So if you can handle these things in different ways, it's not a generic, sorry, I didn't understand you, which puts the blame on the user, which is a bad thing. You want to continue the next step. You want to say, banana is not one of our options. Would you like one of these, or these? And continue with prompting and giving them additional options as much as you can to keep moving forward. It's a linear conversation. You can never go back. You can never turn. You can only go ahead. But you also have the information you've had over the past. So you can use that to your advantage, keep track of that through the conversation, and use that to help direct going through those flows, quote flows. That's where a lot of additional thought ahead of time makes it easier to make those, not just to build them technically, but to know the design. And at any moment, what are those interruptions, and design for interruption early as well.
I do have a question, Jeremy. You brought up a very good point. 2020, we all know we're all sort of sheltering at home, and I'm eager to find out those numbers too, Jessica, during your day. So the question is, you've got a lot of people at home using these devices. Ideally a lot more than they used to. How are you sort of picking the profile, and how are you developing against the profile, the type of user? I'll give you an example why I'm asking this. My daughter, nothing frustrates her more when she than trying to talk to a device and not getting the right answer. It's just chaos. And I know the recognition is a little bit better in some devices than others, but do you have recommendations as to how you approach developing, like when you decide to just turn off the phone, just basically branch off and just do nothing, or just return to the prompt? Like, can you share a little bit there?
Jessica, do you want to jump in? Because you seem to be nodding a lot.
Yeah,
okay, awesome.
Definitely. Especially when it comes to children, children's vocabulary, the way they speak is different than what most models were based off of. So that is definitely a very real issue. So I know when it comes to actions or voice applications that are targeted for children, the way that's recommended to handle errors is to not necessarily fail out, but to try 1 or 2 times and then go, you know what, I didn't understand you. We're going to choose this option. There's this really cute experience that Disney designed where you have to tell Mickey what you want to do, and Mickey gives you 2 options. And when it errors out, it doesn't just stop. It will go, oh, okay, we're going to do X instead, and like keeps it happy and cheery still. And so it really tries not to blame the user because it's designed and aimed for children. So that's, I know, one thing that I thought was really neat, and it kind of goes against the policy or kind of the fundamental rule when it comes to conversation design of like the 3 strikes you're out. And that means after 3 errors, the 3rd error, you should actually exit gracefully going, hey, either I didn't hear you or I'm having trouble. Let's stop here now. And so I always found that to be really interesting, that that's something that's really core. But for the exception of kids, this is how you want to work around for that demographics.
One quick thing, and thank you so much for that. One quick thing to add to that, we talked about screen based assisted devices, and we have one of those in the kitchen. That Disney experience is phenomenal. It's handled very well, and it helps with the frustration as well, because not only do they provide you voice cues, they also provide you visual cues.
Exactly.
So if she consistently gets it wrong because she can't say red, whatever, she's able to sort of click the corresponding button. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, we're getting down to about 5 minutes left, so I do want to encourage audience members to ask any last questions. Also jump in with something you've been excited about during Denver Startup Week, where you're viewing from kind of as we wind down this session. We'll get some final thoughts from folks. To kick you guys off with the stuff, here's a nice note from our friend Mike Wolfson, who most people on the call know, a very prolific Google developer. So thanks for the comment on my shirt, Mike, and thanks for the hello to everybody. If everybody else wants to kind of say a hello, like Miguel from Portugal, who said thank you. We appreciate that, of course. Let's just go through some. We got about 4.5 minutes left. If maybe I'll call out everybody just for like a 1-minute closing statement on something. Noble, we'll start with you if that's okay. If you just want to kind of summarize about privacy and AI, or
yeah, I mean, basically said it all before we get too excited about what we're about to build, and I'm sure we all have exciting ideas. We need to sort of try to think about the consequences of what we're doing, and say, for example, when you're collecting your data set for whatever project you're working, watch out for bias. Be privacy conscious. There's so many different kinds of biases, but for voice systems, for example, if you're creating your own custom model, you might wonder about the human biases. Are you diverse enough in your training set? Is it just Texas type sample voices that might be too narrow? Is it too large? Look out for things like historical unfairness, implicit associations of stereotypes, like group association, or even just look at your annotation. If you're having somebody else annotate your data for you, your data set, and look at whether the data set is actually sensitive or insensitive. Just validate it, get second, third pair of eyes. But at the end of the day, these things change lives. I remember like a year ago, 2 years ago, voice assistants were sort of a joke, and not joke. They're useful to those of us who were aware, but the market didn't really follow along and focus on it. It's only this weird year that we're all living in that sort of accelerates our path to value, for others to see the value in these things. So people are going to use your app if you provide enough value. People are going to punish you by not using your app and not being engaged or adopting your solution if you do not put humans first. And so that's basically my parting message.
Awesome. Thanks, Noble, and thanks for joining us all the way from Virginia. Jeremy, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, the technology to build a voice app is readily accessible and pretty easy for anybody with some general programming knowledge or web development skills, which yields great access. But with that, we haven't built up all of the competencies that are needed to actually create really high quality experiences for these apps, and that just because it's easy to build doesn't mean that you've done it well. And challenging yourselves, your team, your product, whatever your use case is, to dig into the design, thinking through how do I progressively enhance this experience for people? What can I do to handle privacy questions up front? What can I do to make sure that I help people through the right flows and redirect as much as I can? Will make your experience much better, but it also takes a lot more time and energy than you thought, because the thing you coded in an hour to work in one of those bootcamp workshops, which I run sometimes, is just a demonstration. It is not production ready. So don't forget that. Do the work to make it really meaningful, and it pays dividends, especially as the adoption is increasing dramatically.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us from Texas, Jeremy. Jessica, 30 seconds, some final thoughts? Anything?
Yeah, similar to what Jeremy was saying, the voice development and the voice space is still so new that there hasn't been or isn't like, this is the canonical way that we do this. This is how everyone should be doing Y or X, which means it's really exciting. But it also means that this is a great opportunity for folks who might be coming from non-traditional routes or who are from underrepresented groups to really be able to hop in and shine potentially. I know that was one of the best, or the things that really excited me when I was choosing kind of where to land at Google, was the opportunity to be a woman and Latina in tech in this space. So I definitely highly encourage folks to join and try and play. And you never know, in a few years, we might be the experts of this and like writing our own books about it. But another plugin for Google Developer Days, if you're interested, check that out. And if you are interested in learning, of course, we have code labs and videos too. So I'm biased. I work for Google and Google Assistant. So that's my little shameless plug.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us all the way from California. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Denver Startup Week. This has been a Google Developer Group event out of Denver. We're out of time, so I'm going to transition and bye. Say bye, everybody.
Take care.